Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your host from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today we have a special guest speaker, Nick Lukowski from Blueprint Property Development. Nick, hello.
Good morning, Minh. How are you?
Good, thank you. Nick is a small-time, becoming big-time, I think, small-time property developer in Brisbane, who is working with us very closely on potentially lots of pipeline projects down the track. We thought it'd be good to actually bring in someone who comes from the property development world and is spending more and more time and resources on getting involved into the NDIS SDA world. And we want to show you behind the scenes of what goes through site acquisitions and feasibilities and council approvals and whether is there much difference between a normal property development versus a NDIS SDA property development. So, Nick, can you please introduce yourself? Who are you, your background, and why you've ended up in this little pool called the SDA environment inside this big, massive pool ocean called the NDIS?
No problems. First of all, thank you, Minh. I'm very humbled to be invited. But so myself, so very much a strong background in construction and property. I guess then it comes down to a question of how did I end up here in the world of SDA? I guess when it probably goes back about 4 years, sort of first got that initial introduction to the SDA, loved what we saw, loved what we were hearing about it. And then it was just a matter of, how do we move forward in this space? I guess on top of that, there is, personal connection to the space. So, I found that's sort of been a major benefit moving through the space is having lived experience. So,
and what kind of lived experience are you talking about there?
I'll keep it very short and sweet, but I actually met my wife in Sydney, but we're both from Brisbane, moved back. And it's one of those classic cases of doing the move in a state, dropped into the in-laws for a couple of months, which turned into a few years. But my sister-in-law had a high-level disability. So there was a good period there where I actually lived with my sister-in-law who had a high-level disability. And I think that really cements the foundation of how we sort of approach the space too. And I think a lot of the people we've had connection with and discussions with, I think is a great hurdle, for people coming into the space is those that have that lived experience in some way, shape or form with loved ones and friends. Generally, those people have really good intentions within the space.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Nick. But the question I want to ask is, what made you jump into the NDIS property development? Why?
Well, I think we made the same, I think I'm going to call it a mistake. I think the space has evolved a lot over the last few years. So we did initially go, okay, well, let's look at, what is the funding for SDA properties? And it's very attractive. And that's probably where we sort of started the journey to think, okay, how do we make this work? But then we started hitting all the challenges and all the roadblocks.
And those being?
Funding, how to source participants, what is actually good design? The list keeps going, like what is the right mix? What is the right sort of combination of participants? At what design level do you work to? With financing being an issue, how do you fund this? How do you get it moving forward? You've got, the SDA design guidelines that sort of sits alongside building codes and Australian standards. You've got council planning regulations. You've all these things sort of, I wouldn't say neatly overlap, but sets all these sort of hurdles that you need to sort of navigate over and through to get to the right outcome. So we came down through all these sorts of things and it was getting very difficult to understand how to move forward. But we came through all of that and we sort of came up with a core principle. And the core principle was people first. That's how we decided to look at the space, and that's how we decided to move forward. That was based on, one, consultation with various members of the SDA space, some great people that were willing to share their experiences and knowledge. And then we looked at the product that was available for people with disabilities, and it was somewhat underwhelming. Whilst it may have been meeting design guidelines for, high physical support, as an example, I think if you look at all the statistics and all the numbers that are reported on, the 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom, 1 participant was obviously a clear sort of winner in the supply chain. But the product itself, we didn't feel was generally, I won't say it as a blanket, but generally was falling short of the mark. So that's where we looked at, okay, why is everyone doing that? And we could see why they were doing that. They were referencing the funding table.
And by the way, let me jump in here. You're talking about your research being apartments, right? Not housing or everything?
Oh, we did look at everything, but we also thought, I think with housing at the time, a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom, 3-participant home was quite common. And I don't know, I've got 3 kids, and, whenever you put 3 together, I feel like there's always that one that's not quite in. There's usually a stronger bond develops between 2 rather than 3. And then quite often we would meet with people who were like, yeah, maybe we want to invest in the space. I want, 3 participants, all high physical support in a house. And I would literally sit there and say to them, okay, I'd pick 3 or 2 other random people in the cafe and say, would you live with them tomorrow? And their answer was no. So putting that core principle of people first sort of started to help us understand, how do you move into this space to produce, a product that's going to actually cater for someone with, additional needs, but not just in the short term, but in the long term.
Gotcha. So then moving on, apartment project development was the next step of your consideration?
It was. We got to the end of looking at houses and how do we get mum and dad investors or superannuation, people's personal superannuations. And I guess the big hurdles were the amount of, cash that you basically had to have, because no one would really fund anything more than about 50% of the costs. We then sort of got introduced to some, larger, more sophisticated investors in the space, where we sort of started to come together looking at how we could work together to produce. And something that was, the apartments came about because it was something to look at that produced, a high level investment for them. And we thought maybe we'd get some economies of scale in it as well. So the apartment market sort of started to open up to us, but we were very conscious again that it's people first. So we had to look very carefully at how we designed it, what kind of mix we would put into it. And obviously it still has to be feasible, but ultimately it's got to be fit for purpose for someone who has high needs.
Gotcha. In your last 4 years, have you seen many small apartment projects for SDA around Brisbane at all?
I certainly have.
A lot, or just a...
I've seen quite a few. I've seen somewhere I don't even... Look, I know they comply with the guidelines, but you could barely swing a cat in some of these places.
So they're pretty average product, you're saying?
I would say that if someone was living in some of these apartments with a high level of needs, and I think that's where we're seeing, again, it's very much a generalization, but that's where I'd expect to be seeing quite a few people that are in SDA and are seeking an alternate.
So back to my question, how would you rate all the products, the SDA in terms of apartments around Brisbane the last 2, 3, 4 years that you have walked into and touched and felt? Well, what's your opinion about the quality, the level?
Look, I think as a whole, I think there's a lot of people trying to do the right thing and really look to create an appropriate space for people with a disability. I think where you have larger developments, and I think it's almost like an afterthought of, I might introduce a couple of SDA apartments into this development where, floor plans are already set.
To an afterthought, really. Yeah.
An afterthought, yeah, you're trying to make it work into a puzzle where you can't change the size and the shape. I think that's where a lot of, product starts to, be diminished. And I think also trying to put too many people into a dwelling. So like I said, I know that again, a generalization, the NDIA generally looks, to provide funding, in a co-living arrangement. So obviously, those that have the funding levels to live by themselves, which is fantastic. But once you get past, co-living with 2 people, I don't think that's a desirable thing for someone with a disability. It becomes too much, in my opinion. And talking with others, it's a shared belief.
Well, mate, I've seen some of your work in terms of, on paper, designs and locations recently, and I was quite impressed with the size and the specs of what you did there. And I can tell you that I haven't seen anything like that before. I've always seen so many typical 2-bed, 2-bath or 2-bed, 1-bath, 70 to 90 square meters as an average, and that's just so common throughout Australia in terms of the apartment level, in terms of apartment level specs, whatever. How do you, if in a perfect world, how would you design the ideal project or design or spacious environment?
It wouldn't be feasible, Min, but,
well, I'm referring back to your recent design and proposed project you showed me a few months ago. I mean, let's refer to that one. I mean, tell us how big they were and how many bedrooms there were and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So
without mentioning locations or pricing, just design wise, yeah.
No, that's okay. It's one of those things where when we started looking at it, and I feel like as soon as you look at the funding tables as your initial outlook, you're going to head down the wrong path. So we thought, well, yes, I've got some, lived experience, but, I still wouldn't say that I'm an expert. So that consultation period was very heavy to go, what is important to people that are living in SDA? So we got that feedback. So we ultimately then started to look at spaces that we wanted to create a space where not only were the participants in a comfortable apartment. So in this instance, we were generally looking at 3-bedroom apartments with 3 bathrooms of a sort of 150 square meter internal size.
Wow, it's pretty big.
It is certainly, I think, a lot larger than most I've seen. But on top of that, we thought, well, we don't want the participant to be, confined to the 4 walls of this apartment, whether they've got, funding for themselves or they're, co-living. So what else can we do to give the participant more? So we then sort of looked at, okay, well, let's be a little bit more bespoke in how we look at it. And I guess there's 2 trains of thought too. Some people talk about the salt and pepper versus, having multiple participants in one location. That's not in a salt and pepper. But in this instance, we thought, well, if we have a shared space where there could be shared therapy, a shared kitchen, a shared barbecue space, raised garden beds to be able to encourage, some outdoor activity, and, whether it be a large screen or a projector, to sort of encourage a little bit of a community within the building as well. So not only have they got, amenity and, attractions close by, but within the building itself, they can actually wake up in the morning and they can actually have a choice to decide to actually move away from the apartment to another space that could lend to assisting them in, their daily lives and their routines. And further to that, we also thought being pet friendly would also be a bit of an attraction as well.
And the STA provider you consulted with, were they happy with the design and what was their feedback on what you're proposing?
Look, it was very grateful for the consultation we had with the SDA, and I guess at one point it was kind of I won't the term SDA 2.0 was mentioned as this looks like it's an evolution into the future of SDA, of people having a better understanding of what's needed to provide the supports for people with a high level of care.
Awesome. So tell me, you have another site you're looking at the moment in Mount Gravatt Way in Brisbane here, is that right?
Yeah, there's one that we're sort of evaluating at the moment.
How did you come across this site to begin with, and how are you planning to juggle the acquisition and the redesign, if not at all? Yeah,
many challenges. I mean, the acquisition side of things is difficult.
But well, first of all, what is this site? I mean, how big is it? What is currently the plan for design DA on it, and what are the problems with it, and how do you see you playing around with it? Yeah.
So the acquisition side of things, to find sites that are viable is challenging. So that's just from our network of people that we know within industry. Mm-hmm. The site itself is quite generous in terms of what we're able to do with it. It's actually got a DA on it, so there are some limitations there, but some tweaks are certainly available to us before turning soil. It's actually a site that's up to 36 apartments, so that would be a bit more of a salt and pepper arrangement. But a bit of thought needs to go into how we sort of make some modifications to provide the level of dwelling that we would deem to be appropriate. And like I mentioned a bit earlier, it's a matter of making sure that there's the compliance with the STA design guidelines, now that there's a DA in place on the site, we've got to work within the constraints of the planning scheme, and it just keeps unraveling from there. It's making sure design is efficient to make sure.
Okay, so let me just jump in here for a second for our listeners to understand. So it's 35 units, it's normal units, right? And your goal here is to try and insert SDAs in here. Is that correct?
Correct.
How many SDAs do you think will end up being in this project if it proceeds?
At this stage, I'm looking at about 8 of those units being SDA.
2-bedders or 3-bedders?
Well, they are currently, and that's probably where I'm at the moment, is am I looking at 2-bedders to create, say, a 1-bedder, or am I looking at 3-bedders to create 2-bedders?
You mean 2 participants?
Correct.
Yes, so 2-bedder for a 1 participant or 3-bedder for 2 participants? Okay, gotcha.
That's right, but the 3 bedrooms may end up being a 2-bedroom to make sure that we are providing the sufficient level of spatials that are required under the SDA design guidelines. So again, we are playing a little bit in that we are sort of stuck with that. Probably might sound contradictory to what I said before. However, we're at a point with that DA where we haven't actually committed. So, we're playing with a puzzle on paper, and it could even mean that, a couple of units drop out to create more space. So we've still got some options and flexibility in how we approach it.
I want to ask a question. I mean, in the past podcast, we'd always talk about 10 and 1 or 15 and 2. Why are you giving us this 8 number? Why 8?
That is largely because of the, one, the design and what we think is feasible, and 2, those 8 apartments could end up being 10 or 12 participants. So I know it doesn't hit the 15 participant mark, but I don't think it necessarily has to either. So it's all about, the core principle that we have of people first. So if we have to sacrifice a little bit to make it to the level that's suitable, then that's the right decision. It's not always about how many participants can I get? How many units can I get? You've got to sort of take a step back and provide, I guess, a solution for the participant first, and then you sort of look at your feasibility to see how that works.
Gotcha. So is the end game here to find one buyer to buy the whole lot, which is 35-ish units with 8 SDAs, who is more of the typical residential investor developer kind of guy going in? Or is it to find a SDA larger and sophisticated investor or fund to buy the whole lot and retain? Or is it to pre-sell one by one those typical off-the-plan apartments of those 27 there, and then maybe sell off the other 8 one by one? What's the end game here? Are you seeing unravel in front of you here?
The exit strategy.
And by the way, you're looking at this as a development manager perspective, not a developer. Is that correct or not?
Well, we look at it both ways. You have to. The exit strategy is absolutely critical because SDA apartments aren't going to be viewed generally by a financier to have the value of what they are in terms of their rental sort of funding levels versus a standard apartment. So there's massive risks if you don't understand the exit strategy. And then quite often part of that exit strategy is if you're delivering to attract larger investors, you need to tenant the apartments. So being able to source participants, which is also quite challenging. So anyone who's thinking about doing that, they really need to understand how they're going to get to the end of the project. And in many ways, that could be the easy part to then how do I move forward from the end point in being able to tenant SDA participants into these apartments, or how do I sell them? And like you said, there are various different ways it can be done. And I guess we're fortunate over the number of years that we've been in the space that we've started to develop some good relationships with people that allows us to pretty much look at those options, whether it is a more sophisticated investor, selling them one by one. And there's various other ways that it can be done, but we're in a fortunate position where we can have those conversations, at the early stages of the project, which then, whilst that's at the end of the project, that helps us through the process with financiers, with funding, with how we're going to deliver, because the exit strategy is always looked at.
Okay.
When you're looking.
So right now you are assessing the site and the project. That's one. You're looking at rejigging the DA if you can. And number 2, you're looking at the feasibility of whether this is a profitable development going forward as a developer or as a development manager for someone else. Number 4 is to acquire the site, and that is to find funding to acquire the site. And then number 5 is to find the buyers or the exit strategy at the end. And then in the middle of all this is construction and tenders and everything else with council. So that's the basic gist of it all, right, Nick? Yeah. Oh, it's so easy. It's so bloody easy, mate. I don't know why you're so stressed about it all.
That's a very simple way to put it, Min. Yeah, it is. It's very easy. What's that? It's a 6-step plan. No problems.
We talked about developments and whatnot. So I want to give a bit of indication, understand to people out listening. As you know, or as people should know, or may not know, when a bank or lender assesses a project or development, there must be some form of capital profit margin for the developer. Now, as you would operate out there, Nick, doing your feasibility, look at the market value of the end product, being a 2-bedroom unit in that area, as from a valuation point of view. So unless there's profit in the development, the bank ain't going to lend the money. Is that correct?
Yes. So,
and what is that benchmark that the lender has to see on this feasibility for lending the money for this?
It will depend on the financier that you're talking to.
So we're talking 15 or 20 or 25 or 30% return as a capital profit margin for the bank to assess.
Yeah, well, you're going to have, I guess, the more traditional institutions. They're probably going to want to see a higher level of return, but they're probably going to have more restrictions and potentially a different way of valuing it. And again, the exit strategy that we were just talking about will be all important for the project that we're coming up to, which hopefully is not too far away from commencing. We found a financier that understands the space. We had a great chat. We've been in the space for 4 years. He's been in the space for a good 2 to 3 years. And we both kind of had a bit of a laugh of whether it's our own mistakes or learning from others' mistakes. But it's taken both the financier and ourselves a number of years to get to a point to actually understand it, to be able to make decisions within the space. So we're fortunate to have found a financier that's friendly to the space. But again, when we approached him, clearly they knew the space, great people. But again, the exit strategy was 100% the biggest concern between, lending and not lending, and if it was viable. So being a lender, they need to understand. So whether it's a bank institution or if it's a private lender or anywhere in between, you've got to be able to demonstrate how that money that's been lent into the project gets returned. And that's probably been one of the, I won't say a learning curve, but it's been one of the challenges because the exit strategy within the SDA space is complex. It's not something that, I think anyone can start tomorrow and be able to just, within 6 to 12 months, start a project, get to the end and think that it's all going to come together. There's quite a few steps and, key relationships that you need to have in order to execute that exit strategy.
Gotcha. You give me a lot of nerdy talk about development here, Nick, and it doesn't give us justice for our listeners. How can we better understand the end? You're talking about preparation here and feasibility, which is fine, but talking about at the end, what's the strategy if this was acquired now and DA is being redone and the site's acquired and you're waiting for approvals in about 8 or 10 months time from now, what will you be doing on this site, assuming everything goes well? What's next down the track?
In 8 to 10 months, we'll be looking for the execution with the builder. So it's starting on site. So the initial stages, whilst the SDA space for me is 4 years, property and construction has been, 25 years plus. So whilst it's second nature to me, and I sort of can be quite blasé about it, just because of my sort of understanding of the space, I put quite a bit of focus onto that build process because like any development, the build and the execution of the product is the largest piece to the puzzle. It's the largest number that you commit to. And it's probably one of the elements to a development that you have least control over. You only have to look at what's happened over the last 2 years. Certainly macro issues that have faced the industry, and it's caught a lot of people out. Certainly not that could have been foreseen. But again, it's the biggest piece to the puzzle and probably carries the biggest risk. So whilst in about 10 months' time, we'd be thinking that this is actually underway, the process for us to get into that is quite extensive as well. So most people will go to a builder and say, can I have a price? What is that price? Does it work? Does it not work? Because of, I guess, our background and experience at Blueprint, we go a bit further. Because of a lot of people that we know within the industry, we actually talk to the contractors and the suppliers direct, and we sort of form more of a team and collaborative effort with the builder so that we know that we're getting the appropriate price for the build. The builder's happy because it helps him de-risk his project, We help him de-risk his project, and we work in a pretty open manner with the builder to try and make sure that before we start, we've got a pretty good handle on what's going on. We're still subject to, the macro environment and the idiosyncrasies of the build world that, it's never going to be perfect, and we understand that, but it's about making informed decisions. And particularly in the SDA space where there's a lot of key elements to the build that are outside of the normal, we just take the approach that we want to know, we want to understand. We don't want someone else to be making decisions or telling us what something might be or might not be, what may or may not work, what the cost is or isn't. We want to be informed with them to make the right decisions.
Gotcha. Okay. So we'll circle back to project development, development management, and developments in SDA in a moment. Let's go off track a little bit here because there's a reason why I want to ask these questions. We've been talking for the last 3, 4, 5 months now. Is that right, Nick? You've been listening to our podcast?
Absolutely.
What's your impression of our content?
I have.
Our knowledge and our experience, what you knew before you met us, what you've known today by now, and what are the possibilities moving forwards? Give me your feedback about.
I think your podcast is fantastic. Anyone getting into the space should just start listening, and absorbing. We haven't even touched on what the SDA space means with investors and tax, and I mean that's a whole other issue. If you think the development's easy, look at the tax side of things.
You and I had a coffee, and you mentioned the word I could write a thesis on tax now. What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess it's the same as our build process, where we want to know. So we first sort of, and this was with a sophisticated investor. There was, we were all unsure about the tax position on an SDA development. So rather than trying to, try to search and find and get, introductions to people that knew, but we even found that very smart, very knowledgeable accountants were not across this. I guess my burrowing into the tax side of things came about from, fortunately found a tax professional that had an interest in the space and had spent some time looking at it. So he sort of gave me the path to go down, but I wasn't satisfied with just the initial piece to that puzzle. So it was starting to look at the tax legislation. It was looking at, you can probably help me here, Min, when they provide a
private ruling, tax ruling, yeah.
Determination, a private ruling, a tax ruling. So yes, there was a tax ruling, but there's also in the tax code, there's stuff around if a minister makes a decision, and there was a ministerial, paper that was released after the private tax ruling that potentially was contradictory. And I think up until the most recent SDA funding review, which categorized a whole bunch of issues, tax was one of those. And I think it's probably been better addressed. I don't know if it's any clearer for anybody, but I think listening to your podcast, whilst I had a good understanding, even me listening to your podcast helped me further understand the information and the knowledge that I'd absorbed and researched. And it's not just your tax position, it's land tax, it's so many different, and it's complicated, whether you're a registered provider, not a registered provider. You've got to get some solid advice. So just to think, I want to go and be an investor in SDA, you've got some homework to do. And I think the best homework that I can see anywhere, if anyone was to ask me, I would say listen to the podcast, the SDA housing podcast that you guys do. You cover a broad range of issues, and you don't leave anything behind. So you're not missing out on, hard topics and not discussing them. You're generally confronting all of them, discussing them. Yes, people still need to get advice, but as a starting point, I would point in no other direction than the SDA housing podcast.
Well, mate, thank you very much for that plug, but I could plug my own plug, mate. That's okay. No, the reason why I'm going with this is, look, there's a purpose for this conversation right now. Even in a perfect world, you got all your ticks done. The site acquisition, the price is right, the lending is right, the profit margin is right, the pre-sales are right, everything is right. There could be disaster at the back end after it's completed, right? Now, what are those disasters?
Absolutely.
Not necessarily from you, but from after titles, registration, certificate of occupancy, compliance is all done. Tick, 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 tick.
Well, the first obvious one is...
Yes, there we go.
Where are the participants? And that is, we can all read the stats. We can all go, there is a high demand for SDA. Certainly in other parts of the country and, around Brisbane, there's pockets where there's that demand. I would challenge anyone who's new to the space to confirm to me that they've got participants ready to move into a dwelling. That's the absolute critical piece to the puzzle as soon as you start talking SDA.
Okay, good. So this is where the conversation is going now. There should always be a plan B for everything, all right? Business, life, war, development, whatever. There's always a plan B, all right, Nick? So,
Correct.
back to the participants. What is the plan B if there's no participants? Now, before you answer the question, you and I have been talking a lot the last few weeks about those plan Bs, plan Cs. Not to plug myself here, but what are your thoughts about the topics on the whiteboard in front of us here that you and I have been discussing for a few weeks now to deliver a plan B for the one-line buyer, for the mum and dad investors, to de-risk this product should things go wrong? What are your thoughts on the topic of STA, MTA, SIL, Airbnb, which we've been covering for many, many months? We've been dropping a hint every few episodes of these different topics. What are your thoughts or opinions about these Plan B items that may fit into this thing here called a development project of 15, 20, 30, 35 units in one location?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you raised it, Min. You've got to have a plan B, and all those things that you've mentioned need to be considered and understood. To understand them, I don't know how much longer that's going to take people to understand, to figure out how that works. Some of it's easy, some of it's not so easy, but you need to understand it because there is more than just the SDA that's out there. Whilst the SDA is probably one of the more attractive in terms of the financial returns, it's might, in some people might even say it's a riskier proposition because there's a lot more demand, probably say in SIL accommodation. But the SIL accommodation, you're not going to get the same return. But there is options there. And I think over the last couple of years, particularly with house prices going up, I think a lot of investors have dumped product. And a lot of that product, that we understand have been people that have had their properties with SIL providers. So there's been a diminishing of available SIL housing, and certainly not as much SIL housing coming online as, providers would like. That's just one part of all those things that you mentioned, Min. So yeah, plan Bs are, I think, necessary. Any sort of commercial development that you do, you can kind of work within that scope of a plan B of how you complete your product. And I think this is very much the same.
You didn't answer my question, which was, what's your opinion about the plan Bs of a site like Microvat where a buyer, a one-line buyer, buys the whole thing, for example?
You've got to have it. You've got to have it.
Right? Who says, okay, now I've bought it. I've got 35 empty apartments. Now what?
Well, obviously in that instance, you can't have that many SDA apartments. That's right.
Well, we're talking about 8 of 35 here.
Yeah, it could be 8, could be 10, but you're never going to have that many apartments. So yes, if you've got an investor that's interested in the whole development, you have to have all these other elements that work in with it.
Because no matter what you buy in life or in property, what's the purchase price? What am I getting? What's my return? What's my risk? This is no different. SDA or normal is no different.
And I guess, our principle of people first sometimes gets lost with our investors, depending on who they are.
So whether you're buying one apartment or one complex, same philosophy.
Absolutely.
What's my cost? What's my risk? What am I getting back?
And it gets harder, with the interest rate rises that we've had. Yeah, your larger, more sophisticated guys, it becomes a lot harder to do a deal with them because the cost to borrow money is a lot higher. So it gets very complicated. So knowing your plan B or your, let's call them your bolt-on options, are critical when you're looking at a larger development.
So what is your feedback and opinion about the topic of STA and or MTA and or SDA and or Airbnb as the plan B options in a project like this?
It's a must.
Because?
Well, what are your alternatives?
Yeah.
All right, so you're starting to run out of options. You can go down the conventional path of a conventional unit.
I think where I'm leading this conversation, Nick, and this is I'm not here to pick on you. I'm here to educate our listeners. The SDA world is a very small world of the NDIS.
It is. So
there was a quarterly report released for June 2023 showing the spend. I think it's $39 billion, or the planned $42 billion, whatever the number was. Can't remember exactly. And SDA was only $227 million of the $40 billion. It's a very small drop.
It's a small drop in the ocean.
So if you're listening to the SDA housing podcast, I think this show should be rebranded to the NDIS housing podcast because there's so much more to disability than the word SDA.
I think people get caught up in it again because it's probably the easiest one to understand the returns. When you start talking all these other acronyms, Min, I reckon there'd be a lot of listeners who'd be getting lost and they wouldn't know how to understand it or where to go to find the information about it.
Well, go back to the other podcast episodes.
There you go.
The point of this conversation is don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that one basket is SDA because that basket is a very small drop in the big ocean of NDIS. You got to think of this not as a property development or property investment. You can't think like that. You can't bring that mentality into this world. You got to think, what's the outcome? Don't think income, think outcome, right? And the outcome is, how do you look after different participants with different fundings, with different needs and different physical or mental disabilities live in this 4 walls and a roof called an apartment or a house to look, because you've got to look after, it's what they need, what they want. You can't.
Absolutely.
You can't discriminate based on, I mean, they do, but you can't really discriminate based on funding. You got to diversify your risk, spread your risks, the key word here, right? So if you're buying an apartment or buying a house, don't think, my property is empty. How do I find the next SDA guy? What if there's no SDA people in the area?
And that could be the situation.
You got to think about, you got to think STA, MTA, SIL as your fallback position.
It is your fallback position.
And we've been working a lot in the background, Nick, about potential other future projects. I think after a lot of consultation and collaboration with big lenders, big institutions, and big providers that I've been talking to, they agree that what I've been talking to you about is the hack. What's the word? The
cracking the code.
Cracking the code to diversify your risk and creating a multifaceted NDIS housing solution to a broad range of participants in a community.
And I think that's probably it. It's an NDIS housing solution, not an SDA solution.
Yes.
And SDA forms part of that NDIS solution. SDA, 100%.
Because there are density requirements for, as you say, 8 or 9 or 10. Yeah, fine. Okay, fine. But there are other people who may want to live in the same complex who are not SDA and who are just still participants.
And look, I won't give, look, there's this stuff we've been talking about, but we've spoken about, the risks in SDA and NDIS, housing as a solution that we've just mentioned. We always look, I don't know how far you've looked at this, Min, we actually see an element of risk in carers.
Yes, totally.
So I think just recently it's hit the news about the massive increase in demand there's going to be in the aged care sector. Where are we getting all the carers? And the carers that we have, where do they want to be? So not only
that they don't want to be in aged care. There's not enough money in it. Income's very low.
Well, it's not. But so for us, it's also, when you look at an SDA or an NDIS housing solution, how do you attract the carers?
Yeah. So here's another point here. Very good point. You may have the perfect product in Mount Gravatt here. You may have the perfect participants fully funded. But if there are no providers and no carers,
you've got nothing.
You got nothing. That's the point. You got to think outside the square. You can't think, just property development, property purchase, investment return, servicing debt, my yield is, my cash flow. No, you got to think this is a business. Who is going to maintain and manage this property for you as an investor? It's the carer, the SIL providers. Do they have this? Do they have the qualified staff to look after certain participants' disabilities?
And that's going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging.
Registered nurses. It's carers, support workers. Yes. That's another risk that is not in your control as an investor. You have no control over it.
No, it's a piece of the puzzle that your control is by identifying the right location with the right amenity. So I'll give you an example. You deliver, I'm going to pick things that probably won't happen, but, Cabell Ave down the Gold Coast, right in the middle of everything, Brisbane City or South Bank, look, 2 very attractive locations. Good chance you're not going to find too many SDA or NDIS product there, but let's say that there is, and then you're going to have, sort of more regional areas. You're going to have parts of Caboolture, Logan, Ipswich. Now, for a lot of people, it'll be convenient to work in those locations because that's where they live. But if you're trying to attract a carer, where do you think they're going to take their first pick if they neutral in terms of where they live and how they get there? They're going to pick a more desirable location to work and care. And it's got the amenity, it's got the infrastructure, it's got everything there, for not only for the participant, but it's going to have it for the carer as well.
So, Nick, back to your role as development manager. In your due diligence checklist of the whole will you proceed or not, is the topic of providers and carers, support workers a big part or a part of your research to support that?
Yeah, look, it's a big consideration, and it's, I think NDIS housing, they always say the term in property is location, location, location. NDIS housing is location, location, location. The thing is, and I guess probably to a benefit at the moment, is that the locations aren't necessarily the same locations for non-NDIS property. Transport nodes, amenity, like shopping centres and any other sort of established businesses that are providing, services to participants. They're the things that you want to look for.
Okay. So let's get to the crux of this deal here. Nick, Malgravatt is there in front of you. Amenities, is it near a hospital or medical facilities or centres?
Yeah, there's a couple of hospitals not too far away.
How many?
You've got Greenslopes Hospital, you've got QE2 Hospital.
Yeah, Sunnybank, yeah.
And I guess the MARTA, and you got the PA. So they're not too far away.
Also, the Westfield Carradale Shopping Centre is only 5.
Westfield Carradale's maybe 4 or 5 kilometres away. Garden City's about 3 kilometres away.
The Malgravatt Garden City is how far? Right. I spoke to a lot of people, providers in the last 3 years, and they always say to me, do you have any in Malgravatt? I'm going, nope, nothing in Malgravatt. So on the grassroots, ground level, is there talk, chatter from providers about SDA in this area? Tick. Are there nearby hospitals? Tick. Are there the big shopping centres? Tick. The walk score of the property as a property investment? Tick. Like, is there a negative to this site at all for location-wise? I don't see anything.
No, I think, with a bit of luck, we might even have city views on the north-facing end of the building, and we'll have sort of suburban views on the south-facing side of the building. So
yeah.
There's very few negatives. Probably the biggest part to this puzzle is what it's going to cost to deliver.
Okay. So I have some ideas for you, Nick, and this is a shout out to anyone out there with a bit of money. 35 units, we're talking what? 30 million, 32 million, 29 million? What's the project size here?
Project size, so when you factor in build cost, land acquisition, all the other costs, financing, the whole bit.
End retail price, what's the?
Retail, so end retail price is?
Circa, rough price only?
Circa sort of 30, 31 million.
Okay, cool. Call it 32 million bucks. Let's say I had an investor right now who says, I want to buy SDA. I want to get 8 plus OA. I don't know about these other 27, 26 units. How do we handle that objection or that challenge or obstacle to get him over the line? Because he's an SDA investor, not a property investor developer. How would you go about juggling this puzzle to make it all that happen?
Well, it's just a methodology. It's outlining the apartments, what the options are with not only SDA, but the STA, MTA, and SIL and everything else.
Oh, no. He says, I don't want 8. I don't care about the other 25.
Well,
the answer is, I'll give the answer, Nick. You tell me yes or no. We just go to Ray White or LJ Hooker or whoever around the corner and get them sell the 27 units off the plan.
Pretty much.
That's the pre-sales. That's that other way. There's 8 left. Well, old man here buys the 8 and then we're done.
Pretty much.
Done. And all the 8 left over with him and the providers will work out the sourcing of participants long term, which is going to be a 2-year project. I assume to DA it and deliver it to market. Is that right? 2.5 years?
This has a DA, but obviously to complete the design ready for builds, delivery, so 6 months for design, delivery is probably, 14, 16, say 18 months. That's about 2 years.
2 years, okay, cool. So in 2 years' time, again, your job is to deliver the product. That's all your job is to do as a development manager.
That's it.
The issue of procurement, participants, tenancies, that stuff is between the provider, providers, and the owner or owners. Correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. Pretty straightforward. 6-step process. I don't know why it's so hard for you, man.
I guess the benefit is we know the right people to talk to as well. So it's getting easier, Min, but what do we say? It's a six-step plan, and it's easy. We'll do it tomorrow.
That's just the long short for our listeners, I guess. We don't want to overcomplicate property development as a thesis here, but the point of this podcast episode today is to show our listeners there's a lot happening behind the scenes to create product for SDA. Right, Nick? And it takes years to deliver it. Years.
There is, absolutely. Well, it's taken me years, and I guess it's been a great journey, Min, but it's taken time.
Yes. But you know what? If you went out there right now, door knocking to all the providers, and you say, when do you want it? The answer is going to be now, today.
There will be.
No, that's not the answer. There is no other answer. I want it today.
Yep.
I'm sorry, everyone. It takes years to deliver and build product in the NDIS. And we can only work with the data and the research and the demand as we see it at that current moment. But what happens in a year's time or 2 years' time is out of our hands. Construction takes time, I guess. And to build 35 units takes 2 years. That's just the way it is. But all you can do is place this product in a high-demand area with a big population, normal population, which obviously will have a nice, strong NDIS population, which means there's a good amount of SDA participants in that region or product area. That's the point. And obviously, in a nice, strong population like this, like Margaret here, you'd have a lot of providers in the area as well, Nick. So again, go on Google Maps, Google research, have providers in this area. Take a look at it. If there's no one there, then run away and hide. Avoid that product. If there's sufficient providers in the area who obviously have carers and participants, they are the feeders. Like the silk businesses are the feeders to the SDA businesses. It's like rugby league. You got the feeder clubs who feed the main clubs. Same. Yeah. But this is just about property development in NDIS and SDA. And the point is there are other things to understand, to be aware of, and that is carers, providers, participant needs, the non-SDA needs of participants being their housing solutions needed. Because here's another thing, Nick. The SIL houses are the feeders to the SDA.
Yes, absolutely they would be.
The SDA participants come from the SIL housing environment.
Yes.
So you need to have the SILs in the area to feed them in.
Yes.
And the other issue is sometimes providers don't want to release their participants out of SIL housing into SDA housing because they lose the participant. That's another issue, which is political, but it's business is business, I guess.
Well, it is. They're running their business and that's part of their business.
Yeah.
So I think the overall, if I was to narrow it down to one word, it's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. But Nick, it is not complicated. What are you talking about?
No, it's an easy 6-step plan. Yeah.
7-step process. Any final words, Nick, from you as a small-time developer becoming a big-time developer one day to any other aspiring property developers who want to understand and get into this market, or advice from you as a developer to their mum and dad investors that, what's your piece of advice, your final words, I guess?
I think the approach we take, like I've mentioned, we don't just take someone's word for it. We get the information, we try to digest it, understand it, but then we try and do a bit more of our own research to better understand it. And I think the more you understand, the better you're going to fare working through this kind of process. I think if you leave it too much to others, unless you've got that trust with them and you know that they know and understand what they're doing, there's very few people that I've come across that I go, wow, this guy actually really, really knows.
Are you talking about me?
Well, you are one. Definitely one, Min. But people have a good knowledge of parts to all of this,
yes,
but not as a collective whole.
Yeah.
So you've really got to take your time. Like, people can tell you about the SDA all day long, but once you start adding some of these other complications and these other issues, like tax and planning schemes and design guidelines, they'll probably dismiss it as, not a big issue, or I can point you in the right direction. But as someone who's stepping into it, understand it, know what the right thing to do is to get the best outcome for your investment.
Mm-hmm. So just a shout out there, if anyone out there is in South East Queensland who owns land sitting dormant, has a site trying to offload, needs some help to get DA or design ideas on their site or project, can they reach out to you, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, anyone who wants to do the development, anyone who wants to sort of JV it, or anyone who just wants to offload a site, we certainly can assist in various ways and capacities through that, and would welcome anyone to reach out to have a chat.
But also people out there who will only touch it if it's built. So if you're looking for an end product, come talk to Nick, because he will pull the resources and the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together to deliver that product to market, and then you can buy it when it's completed.
And look, if you're in a fortunate position where you can get this thing built and tenanted, that gives you a few more options, and you certainly potentially can command a higher return. But I don't think I've met anyone yet that's willing to do that.
Well, there's an old saying, Nick. There's plenty of ways to skin a cat, right?
There is, and in development and property, there's 1,000 ways to skin it.
Okay. To all those poor cats out there being skinned alive by Nick, hey? The big bad developer, hey? Big bad wolf.
That's what they say.
Nick, what's the best way for someone to get in contact with you? Is there a website or a phone number? Or what's the go?
Yeah, bluepd.com, I think it is, .com.au. My email's there. It's just nick@bluepd.com.au. That's
Yeah, okay, good.
the colour blue, PD, P for Peter, D for dog.
So you're a hired gun, right? A freelancer. You're a guy who can do developments, you do developer, you can project manage, you can be a DM, you can do all those tasks there?
Yeah, we can see through a development on behalf of someone. We can work with someone. Yeah, we can. Yeah, it really comes down to the appetite of the individual. And I always tell them it's just a risk profile.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's a 1 hour session there. I think I hope that our listeners have gotten a really good feel for the word complicated with Nick, and we blame Nick for that. I've always tried to keep this, we, Debbie and I and the team here, we've always tried to keep the topics very simple, very generic. It's when advanced IQ people like Nick come to our show that blows us out of the water, and I think it's not fair for him to show us how smart he is, right?
Well, we could talk for another few hours, but I think we've done enough.
Okay, that's enough. Nick, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it, and we hope to bring you back one day to answer all the queries that are coming in the inbox. Going, we don't understand this podcast with Nick, okay?
Oh, look, I know it was touching on it. No, look, I don't know what to say other than it is complicated and there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle.
My one last question to you, Nick. Is this a journey, a SDA journey you see walking down this path, going down this path for a long time ago? Or are you like SDA one day, normal, non-SDA another day? Or what's your working life moving forward looking like here?
Well, if I go back 4 years, after 2 years, I thought that was my journey.
Yeah.
And then the next doors started to open. So, it's now a probably 4.5 year journey now.
Mm.
And I feel like I'm only at the start of my journey.
Wow. Because there's not many guys out there who dedicate all their energy and resources to one topic called SDA developments. There's not.
Well, I wouldn't say I've been 100% focused on it every day for the last 4.5 years, but it's certainly been a major contributor to my life in working through this space over the last 4.5 years.
But now, if we unlocked the cheat code now, we can do a lot more now, can't we? Okay, so calling out all those landowners out there who don't know what to do with their land, bring it to Nick and he'll skin it.
He'll skin it the right way.
Thank you, Nick. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Thank you, Min.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.